Hi, everybody. Great to see you today. Really happy to have you here for February's learning series. I think we have everyone in the room. We're live. And so I'm going to start my presentation right away so that we can hear from our great speakers. And welcome to this month's learning series. I'm Leslie Burkus. I'm the Executive Director of the Urban and Community Forestry Society. And our entire learning series is made possible by Bartlett tree experts. Together with Bartlett, we share the goal of raising the bar for urban foresters and arborists across the country. And so thank them for their support. And overall, we thank all of the sponsors of the Urban and Community Forestry Society, including Bartlett Tree Experts, Davy Resource Group, and EOC. And most of all, we thank you as the members who make this society possible. Everything we do is in service to you. A professional membership society is here to raise the bar, help you feel more confident in the decisions you make, and be your voice at the national, international level. So we thank you as a member. And if you aren't a member, we hope that you'll join when the time is right. So we're starting off with just brief introductions to the society and the work that we do, but most of all, we want to hear from our speakers, Carol Teeter and Todd Fagan. And real quick before I talk about that, Carol was actually my boss and mentor at my former job, Trees Forever. And Todd also is the city forester with City of Cedar Rapids and worked really closely with him in my former role. So it's really special to have both of them here with us today, and I thank them for joining us. They're going to be talking about how the city of Cedar Rapids responded to an unprecedented disaster for the city, a derecho that went across the state of Iowa, which is essentially a land hurricane. And they'll talk more about that, but it really destroyed the tree canopy in city of Cedar Rapids. And with that came a time to clean up, of course, and then work to redevelop and regrow the canopy of the city. So we'll talk about the ReLeaf Cedar Rapids plan, a 10-year action plan to help to restore the city's tree canopy. And with something of that nature and that magnitude, there has to be a lot of preparation, partnerships, and community-driven planning. And they'll talk about all of that and really hope that it'll be a model for you as you think about other potential disasters that might impact your city, or maybe a disaster you might be recovering from now and how you can plan for that long term. We'll have time for question and answers at the end. And at the very end, we will have a form for you to submit ISA CEUs. As we're getting started here, please drop your name and where you're from in the chat. It's so great to see where people are joining us from around the globe. So please put that in and we'll start to see where everyone's joining. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel afterwards. Again, ISA CEUs, this is approved for 1 CEU and we will submit that on your behalf. The form will be posted in the chat at the end. And you all are on mute, so we'll just rely on the Q&A and the chat for questions at the end. So you can see the Q&A button at the top or chat, put those questions in whenever they come up. If you are new to the Urban and Community Forestry Society, our job is to build the confidence, competence, and camaraderie of all professionals who manage trees and forests to create 15 more livable communities. I'm going to break that down further, though. What that really means to us is we want to be the professional membership home for the people who make and support daily tree care decisions. If you decide who, what, where, when, how, or why a tree goes in the ground, comes down to the ground, is pruned, some sort of decision is made about that tree, you belong to this society. Just like doctors and nurses have a professional membership home, you as tree people get to have that as well. And like I said at the beginning, it's all there to help you feel more confident in your decisions, connect you with others across the globe and country who are having the similar issues, and to be your voice. You might feel lonely in your spot where you sit now, maybe one person show, maybe you have just a small urban forestry team. Joining together means that we have 2,100 members who are in your corner and we can speak on your behalf in that way. To help do that, we provide a number of different resources, including our City Trees publication, our annual conference, our Municipal Forestry Institute that's coming up at the end of this month. And you'll be hearing a lot more about this. We have new accreditation standards that have been launched. They're on our website now. And this sets the bar. What does it mean to have a top-notch, world-class urban forestry program? Well, we now have standards out there for you to measure yourself to. And then you can also get officially accredited through UCFS. So more to come on that. Take a sneak peek at the standards now, and hopefully you'll be interested and we can work together on that. With that, I'm going to wrap up now because, again, I want to turn over to Carol and Todd right away. Thank you to our members. You are who make this possible. We are here for you every single day. If you're not a member, really hope that you'll join when the time is right. And with that, Carol, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to kick it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Leslie, both for
Yeah.
that introduction and for inviting us to this presentation today. I'm hopefully sharing my screen here.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, all right, great. I want everyone on the call today to do me a favor and cross your fingers and toes that my headset stays with us today. It's being a little janky, but hopefully it'll stay with us for this whole presentation. So I'm going to start us off with just a really brief introduction to Cedar Rapids and describing the event that happened on August 10th, 2020, which was something that really changed our community for generations to come, really. If you're not familiar with Cedar Rapids or Iowa, Cedar Rapids is in the eastern part of the state. We are located along the Cedar River. We're the second largest city in Iowa. We have a population of about 140,000. If you take into consideration other communities in the area down to Iowa City, which is 30 miles south of us, there's about 500,000 people in this part of the state. One of the things that Cedar Rapids was long known for was our lush urban forest of mature trees that lined our streets and filled our parks. We are proud to hold the Tree City USA designation longer than any community in Iowa, and I think we're in the top 10 in the nation for holding that designation for so long. We have a tree in our logo, albeit it's a stylized tree based on the Tree of Five Seasons, which you'll see in the image here on the lower left. It's along the river and a big landmark in our downtown. We even have a tree in our name referring to the red cedar trees that historically grew along the banks of the Cedar River. Our community's abundance of mature trees made what happened on August 10th, 2020, even more devastating. We all woke up that morning to a weather forecast that called for warm temperatures and a chance for afternoon thunderstorms, which is a pretty typical summer day in Iowa. However, as the forecasted thunderstorms gathered to the west of our city, they formed a band that extended more than 60 miles north to south. This complex of thunderstorms sped across Iowa with wind speeds gathering force as it moved, finally reaching as much as 140 miles an hour when it reached Cedar Rapids. That's the equivalent of a category 4 hurricane. Unlike a hurricane, though, we didn't have days to prepare for it, and we're not used to hurricanes here in the middle of the country, which means that our tree canopy was not shaped by earlier hurricanes that we might have experienced if we were in those hurricane-prone regions. We are more used to tornadoes in Iowa, but the difference between the derecho and a tornado is that a tornado is typically very briefly in one place. Winds may last as much as 5 minutes from the perspective of those impacted by the tornado, whereas the winds of the derecho that affected Cedar Rapids that day was up to 45 minutes. And tornadoes typically are fairly localized, whereas the derecho impacted all 75 square miles of Cedar Rapids, as well as the surrounding communities. So the derecho started actually in South Dakota and was active for 14 hours, finally petering out in Ohio. It left behind destruction that was estimated to cost $11.5 billion, considered the costliest thunderstorm in U.S. history. As far as Cedar Rapids go, there were many injuries in Cedar Rapids as a result of the derecho, but thankfully no deaths. There were 4 people in other parts of Iowa who died due to the derecho. The main impact, of course, there was property damage in Cedar Rapids and elsewhere, and it took residents many months to recover from that. But an even more long-lasting impact was the destruction of 2/3 of our community's tree canopy, an estimated 670,000 trees. Most of those trees were on private property, but an estimated 140,000 trees were on public land along our streets and in our parks. And I'm going to turn things over to Todd now to talk about the immediate response to the storm and the months and the recovery, the months that followed. And then I'll be back to talk about what we've been working on to restore and even expand our urban forest. Todd?
So thanks, Carol. So you can go to the next slide if you could, please.
Okay. Yep.
So just to kind of go over some basics here, this is kind of meant to be more of a cautionary tale, I guess, of just some of the challenges that we had going through our first FEMA level event here in the city. And there are just some assumptions that we're going to make here. So in preparation for this sort of thing, have an inventory. They are vitally important. As professionals, we're all aware of the need for that. I've worked with a lot of engineers, and one of their common sayings is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And it's a completely accurate statement when it comes to something like this. It does protect you, but you also need to protect it. This is what drives and what helped drive a lot of our billing and understanding the scope of work, and even just the FEMA reporting. The difference between emergency action plans and continuing operations plans, that's another important thing. We had started talking about continuing operations plans shortly before COVID, but they went on pause. Luckily, those conversations did kind of spark some thought processes to help us get through this. So as Carol said, the entire city was affected. Not only that, it knocked out phone, radio, cell towers, TV. The communication was essentially non-existent. So how do you react to a citywide event, when you have no way to communicate? So those are some of the things we had to work through. Even things like, okay, we're going to start cleaning things up. Do we have gas? The pumps are electrical powered. There's no power. How do we get that? Can people even get to work? So a lot of those factors, just in managing the debris and managing the accident, were things that we'd talked about with the continuing operations plans, that really it was good to have at least that background of kind of thinking outside of the box. And even the day of, where's our staff? Again, we couldn't communicate with them. So, have they been trained on what to do in these events, and how to act, and where to go and what to do? One of the biggest things is to know who's running the show and what's the main priority. For us, the day of, again, it's our team, our leadership team, and response team was there driving a lot of it, but I wasn't even able to get into the conversation until the next day, because I just physically couldn't get there with the destruction that was in the city. So being able to have those discussions and having some goals and some understanding of what you need to do, and some of the challenge you might face is really important to have kind of before these things happen, and just kind of be thinking about them. So next slide, please. So some of the FEMA challenges that we ran into that we had no idea, it's our first one. So, removal versus pruning, the standard that we had to deal with in terms of what designates a tree that can be removed is, it was just basically significant damage. Well, that's great, but who decides what significant damage is? What if there is a disagreement? Who makes that call? And even for some of the pruning cuts, FEMA will pay for anything larger than a 2-inch cut. Where's that decision made? We had a lot of 1/2-inch cuts and 1-inch cuts that were just cut back to a 2-inch diameter branch. We had some of those things going on. And even just how the cuts were made. We have all this damage in trees already, and we don't want to do more damage. But again, in terms of what FEMA will pay for, it really doesn't matter if it's a correct collar cut or if it's a heading cut between nodes. So a lot of times that might equate to double work. You got to go back and fix all those. One of the things I can't stress enough is working against fear-based decisions. Very, very quickly, a lot of the residents and some of the decision makers in town learned what a widowmaker was, and everything became a widowmaker. So investigating those to find out what was legit and what wasn't took some time, and it's time that you don't have. Again, the entire city was affected by this, so we had to be as efficient as we could. Now, are you going to deal with public trees or private trees? A lot of homeowners do not want their private trees touched. They're going to deal with them on their own. FEMA can pay for both, but it depends on what you want to do and what you're going to communicate to residents. So that's a decision that has to be made, and it has to be communicated to your contractors, because a lot of times they will just get a blanket order to go repair everything, and if it's broken, they'll fix it regardless of where the property line is. Everything is monitored with FEMA and measured, including the debris trucks that haul everything. So, and again, it's important to realize that just because those trucks can hold 20 cubic yards of material doesn't mean it happens every time. So what's the process to measure that? How are those people trained? You know, a lot of those questions in that monitoring, that Q&A or that QC work to control quality and understand just what's going on needs to be done. We did get the question of what do you want done and what are you willing to pay for? Those are two different things, obviously, and we can do whatever you want, but FEMA won't pay for everything. So again, judging, you know, where you want to slide into that spectrum. The bottom line is, though, that you're going to be overwhelmed. If you've never gone through this before, it is an overwhelming process. The cleanup and the act of getting everything cleaned up is one side of it, but the regulations and the processes and the contract management is another, and just the whole scale of it can work against you in terms of trying to do everything you need to get done. So next slide, Carol. Thanks. So this is just one. I always put this in here. You know, are these trees significantly damaged? Are they prunes? Are they, you know, are they removals? What are they? And for FEMA, it could be a couple different things. You know, we made the decision, and we use this a lot, that like the tree on the left there, that's a removal. There's too much damage. But the tree on the right, even though it's far from perfect, it still had a decent central leader that was stable and some canopy left. So pre-Derecho, it would have been a removal for sure, but we wound up keeping it. But having these discussions and trying to get everybody on the same page so that, you know, the people tagging these trees and making these calls understand what you do and don't want is something you gotta figure out and make the time to train them. Next slide, please. So cleanup. Are you going to do public only or public and private? Adding private debris pickup adds a significant amount of work and challenge. Again, where's everything going to go? It's got to be separated. FEMA won't pay for some things and we'll pay for others. What's the timeline? You know, when does it end? Particularly for private, we had a lot of folks that you know, we'd get done with the cleaning up a street, and 2 weeks later we'd get a call that they had debris out. So we had to set some serious deadlines and timelines and communicate that out, that you had to have it done by a certain time. Who's the main contact with the contract that you've established, and what authority do they have? Do they have the support from leadership? Do they have the support kind of adjacent to them, or in terms of people that report to them that are going out and checking on the work? That's important too. Is this their main focus? You know, are they doing this and 4 other things, or are they able to focus on this entirely? And that's that may be a question of scope. You know, the damage may be enough to where they can do some other things. This may need to be their main focus, depending on just how great the devastation was in your area. And regardless, clear expectations, they have to be set and enforced. And you just got to make sure that you're, like I said, quality control tends to be the name of the game here, and enforcing that contract to protect yourself and make sure that everything is going to work out for you in terms of the FEMA reimbursements that you got to go through. Next slide, please. So the general contractor, if you decide to go that route, if this is too much for you to clean up and you're hiring a general contractor to come and pick up the debris and work that side of the problem, they are a resource. They have experience in this. Most of them have been doing this for a long time, and they know their way around FEMA, but they really can't be the resource. Again, monitoring is essential. We had some challenges with PPE and general safety. A lot of these companies, they use several subcontractors, and not all of those contractors are on the same page in terms of quality of work and you know, their safety consciousness. I'm not saying they're bad companies, but just in terms of what they deal with and where they're at and the culture of the area they're located in, it may not be within the scope of their work. We had significantly higher expectations than I think what they were used to. We were doing a lot of safety checks and really getting after them about operating safely. Going back on it, to me, more than one general contractor might be best. If you only have one, you are kind of stuck with them if they're not doing a good job. So that's a good thing to think about. And again, these folks are primarily coming from the southeast where they're dealing with hurricanes. That type of damage is different than the tornado and derecho that we had here. In our case, it was reversed in terms of the type of debris. They had a lot more vegetative debris versus construction material from houses. A lot of them had no idea about oaks and oak pruning. That was a challenge. I've mentioned double work and fear. How they get paid is another thing. Separate bids, I think, are really important looking back on this. If they are bidding on everything, the pruning, the hauling, the debris management, that lets them, work pricing to their advantage, and that's great, but sometimes that can have negative effects on other work. Because again, they have subcontractors coming in who find themselves removing trees for $300, depending on how it was bid out. Make sure you have clear expectations on damage and repair, how that's going to be handled. Again, strongly recommend significant holdbacks for performance on the contracts. And probably the number one thing I would recommend is getting a separate arborist. If in-house you can't do this, have a separate arborist that is making some of these calls in terms of what is staying and what is going, and make sure that the contract outlines where they fit in the hierarchy of decision making. Next slide, please. So you've got some unknown unknowns that are just kind of general things. Again, back to pruning and removals, a lot of the residents we had either wanted trees that needed to be removed or wanted trees removed that were okay to stay. To the point where they were moving around tags and painting trees that weren't painted. So it was one of those things we never really expected to happen, but we had to deal with. Insurance expectations for residents. We had to wait for trees to get pulled off houses before we could take them, and that was a frustration for residents trying to explain that. And even again, with the whole scope of the entire city being damaged, a lot of times that resulted in long wait times. And we always say we had about 10,000 new arborists the day after the derecho. That was great, but it can be a curse as well. A lot of times they're doing work that it makes the cleanup longer. There's a safety aspect there in terms of things that could hurt them on the parkway. So again, things to be aware of. And even just the concept of the scale of damage. We said this a lot, that someone has to be first, someone has to be last. It took a year to get the city cleaned up. So there were some people waiting quite a long time with debris in their parkway. With FEMA, you have a monitoring company. Again, that is a whole separate set of challenges. Is their software compatible with your inventory? What are their field procedures like? We went from having about 95% confidence plus in our inventory to about 50% when everything was all transferred over. None of this was intentional. It's just kind of one of those things that happened with how things worked out. And we said there's no time to do it right the first time, but there's always time to do it right the second or the third when it comes to the training and what are the folks out there doing. And even the staff that are doing this, how are they trained and do they have staff? Most of them don't. They hire locally. They hire people locally, put them through some training, and then turn them loose. And we appreciate the help, but sometimes that led to other problems later on. So next slide, please. And this is a quick example. So these tags here that you see, those would get switched around. We started painting and tagging and doing different symbols and stuff because folks were, again, they wanted their tree gone and it really didn't need to go, and so on. And even, like I said, we had folks standing next to other trees entering this data, watching a tree 40 feet away getting removed, and the way the data transferred back, things were not aligned very well. So I would urge, a quick check, a week into this to make sure everything transfers over properly and making sure that everything is going to line up and protecting that tree inventory that you have. Next slide, please. So a quick word on storm chasers. This was actually one of our biggest concerns. It shouldn't have been. These folks were very professional. They were very efficient, worked very, very fast, very professional overall. The insurance was the one challenge. I mean, I think they know how to work insurance, and the charges that we were seeing seemed absurd. But again, that's how they worked it with getting things paid and making a profit. But there were some surprises that we had. We had some of these people come in and they actually managed to get their homeowners paid after all the debris was removed by leveraging the value of the logs that these folks had. So we had several stories of people walking away with a check for $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000. So it's, like I said, overall, these folks did a great job, and they were really good to have around the city. So next slide, please. So just finishing up here, where's all this stuff going to go? Can it stay there? What are you going to do with it in the long run? We had 8 haul sites for about 93 acres. And they were busy, as I said, for a year. This debris was being piled 15, 20 feet high. Eventually it was ground down into chips, and those chips went through to various other higher end uses, from being further worked through to become bags of mulch at Menards, to different sorts of biological cells in farm fields, and everything in between. So, but FEMA will also pay to restore this. So once that material gets out of there, keep that in mind, that they will bring it back to its original state. Last slide, please. This is just, again, a bit of the scope here. This is one of the sites, one of the smaller ones. It takes a lot of space to deal with that. I believe this was our residential site. You can see some of the vehicles pulling in there. So again, just knowing, dealing with FEMA and trying to figure out what exactly needs to be done is a challenge. And that was a big learning curve for us while we were trying to get this figured out. Next slide, please. So while we were doing all that, within days, we started talking about replanting. And this is where Carol fits in. She's gonna take over at this point and go through the ReLeaf program and how we have worked to replant around the city since then.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. So as Todd said, even as the cleanup took months. And so even as that cleanup was happening, the city reached out to, we're very fortunate in Cedar Rapids to have one of the leading urban forestry nonprofit organizations, Trees Forever. They're based in the Cedar Rapids area and had done work with the city for years. And city leaders reached out to them, and we also had some background with Jeff Speck, who's an internationally known urban planning and design expert. So the city reached out to Jeff and asked if he would lead the planning effort, and then they brought in Confluence Landscape Architecture to also help with the planning effort. As devastating as the Derecho was, this also provided us an opportunity to, as you see here, plant the seeds of a more diverse, more resilient, and more equitable urban forest. And please keep in mind that this happened again in August of 2020, so that's at the height of the Derecho. I'm sorry, of the pandemic. And so getting public involvement was challenging, but the planning committee, the planning group was really committed to get the public's input. We had 2,800 people participate in the planning process, and that was done both in person and virtual public workshops. Portal was set up on the city's website to allow people the opportunity to provide their opinions about how the replanting should happen. And planners from the city's planning department went out to neighborhood events, went into the parks with clipboards and asked people what their priorities were for how we replant. And out of that process, the guiding principles were established. There were several that people were able to choose from, but the 5 that rose to the top were people wanted to see native habitat restored to benefit birds, pollinators, and other wildlife. They wanted to do this in an equitable way, emphasizing species diversity, and then of course beauty and character are important as well. And I think everyone saw it and continues to see this as an opportunity to engage not only the youth in the replanting effort, but really understanding that the young people today are the ones that are going to enjoy these trees at maturity. Those of us who are adults are not going to see those trees at their mature age. So out of the 7 months, actually the whole planning effort took about just over a year, but a 10-year plan was adopted by the City Council in February of 2022. Our goals at the city is to replant 42,500 trees over those 10 years. Again, we lost about 140 in the public on the public property. So these 42,000, it's an estimable task, but it's not going to replace everything that we lost in the Derecho, but it will give us a good running start. The estimate is that in total, this will take about $30 million to replant that number of trees. There is a private effort going on too to help the private sector, and Trees Forever and some of our other nonprofits in town are leading that effort to help residents acquire quality landscape-sized trees and to learn more about planting and maintaining trees as well. So the planners of the relief effort developed a master tree list that you see here, and it includes about 61 different species. Most of those are native species, but not all. We do, again, we're striving for diversity, and sometimes you have to introduce some of the non-natives to achieve those diversity goals, especially in the rights of way, which everyone on this call understands is a challenging environment. The one species you will not see on this list are maples, because if you notice the tree inventory slide that Todd had earlier, we have a lot of maples. We had a lot of maples before the trade show, and we still have a lot of maples. Unfortunately, a lot of private residents are still not getting that message about diversity and not planting maples. We have a t-shirt that we developed here at the city that we give out at public events that says, "Friends don't let friends plant maples." And then we talk about there's nothing wrong with maple trees, we just have too many of them here. So we are striving for diversity so that our urban forest isn't devastated by the next pest or disease. When I'm out presenting to people, I say, you know, we lost a lot of trees, obviously, in the trade show, but we also at the same time had been undergoing that slower moving natural disaster of emerald ash borer, where I think there was 7,000 ash trees that were just in the private on the private property that were destroyed, and of course Dutch elm disease before that. So we want diversity to mitigate against some of those concerns, but also to help hopefully our city our urban forest adapt to climate change. And then native, because we want to be able to make sure that we are setting the conditions that will grow and support wildlife. So we also looked at our ordinances and policies at the city, and one of the big differences on the lower left, the graphic on the lower left exemplifies this. We're planting trees closer together along the in the parkway than we did before. We're planting the shade trees at 30-foot intervals and understory trees at 20-foot intervals. And the reason for that is we want those roots to intertwine, with the idea that those intertwined roots will give the trees of the future more resiliency in windstorms and be better able to withstand future windstorms. We're also requiring more trees in parking lots to reduce the heat island effect. And then when trees have to be removed due to development, it used to be that the developers would just have to plant 2 1.5-inch caliper trees for every tree removed, but now we are requiring replacement at the total caliper inches. So if a 24-inch diameter tree is removed, there's options of planting either 12 2-inch diameter trees or 16 1.5-inch diameter or actually caliper replacement trees. So where we're at so far is since the Derecho, we've planted just over 18,000 trees. We're about 43% towards our goal for the 10-year plan. We still have about 24,000 trees to plant, but we are about a year ahead. So we've planted over 4,500 more trees than the plan outlined. The 42,500 trees were broken out over so many trees per year over the 10 years, and we're so far exceeding that. One of the ways that we're able to do that and to accelerate our effort is we did receive a $6 million grant from the U.S. Forest Service to help replant. That's one of the Inflation Reduction Act grants. And then we have, through the state, we have a $3.5 million CDBG Disaster Recovery Grant. And so those two grants together have really helped us to accelerate our effort. Some of the challenges at first, especially, were the stumps. There were just so many stumps in the parkway that had to be removed before we could plant. We've caught up now. That's not an issue any longer. Supply chain, because not only is Cedar Rapids replanting, but neighboring communities and really communities across Iowa. The estimate in Iowa is that 7 million trees were destroyed by the derecho. And so, especially early on, we had challenges. There just weren't enough trees in the supply chain. Nurseries are catching up, and we're better able to get the species that we are seeking, but it was a challenge early on. Funding, we were fortunate to get those two large grants, but we still have several $1,000,000 yet, that we'll have to raise or find before the end of the plan to replant all our trees. I should say too, our city council has committed $1,000,000 each year to the relief effort, the replanting effort. So that's a huge help as well. The biggest challenge, though, I would say, is watering. And especially in the first couple years of the plan, we were in the midst of a multi-year drought. And so watering the trees were very challenging. We do have in our contracts, we require 2 years of watering, and we have a 2-year warranty for those trees. We had some trouble with contractors who didn't follow through with that obligation. So we changed our contracts a bit, and we do have retainage on the contracts. So they get paid 70% on planting. After 1 year, as long as they've been watering, they get paid another 15%. And then after the second year, if they've watered, they'll be paid the final 15% of the contract. So, and Mother Nature has helped us out a bit more in the last year or so. So we've had better rains. Lessons learned, patience is difficult, especially when you know what you've lost and how long it will take to regain it. I can't tell you how many residents I've talked to who I've had to tell, last week, I had to tell a man that, we don't anticipate planting in his neighborhood until next year in 2027. And to which he said, I'm 82, I'm going to be dead before the trees get planted. I've heard that so many times. I'm going to be dead, or, I'm older, I want the tree now. And to which I respond, I wish I had a magic wand, and we all do, and can restore our trees. However, not everyone likes trees, and I'm not a psychologist, but I would hazard that there are many people still in Cedar Rapids that have some form of PTSD from what they went through. There are many people who seem to think that the trees that we plant, this year, if in the spring when we plant a tree, the next day somehow it's going to be 50 feet high and risk their house. And we've really made a commitment to do the structural and cyclical pruning that's necessary to set these trees up for success. And but it's really a challenge to some people. By the way, I saw people from Nashville on this call. It's still emotional. I'm sorry what you've gone through with the ice storm. I saw someone in the city say that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be hesitant to have trees planted back, but it's important, and it really is, and it's really going to be challenging to convince some people. Another challenge is landscape contractors don't necessarily know how to plant trees, and so we do a lot of teaching of how to plant trees to contractors. Quality assurance takes a long time to make sure that the trees are planted correctly. But there's always people who want to help, even though we include watering in the contracts. We have a lot of residents who, have stepped forward and say that they want to water the trees. So we developed the tree bud sticker. We put them on the irrigation bags to alert the contractors that they don't have to water those trees, that the residents are taking care of it. So I can't say we have hundreds and hundreds of residents who have come forward to help out with this, but there certainly is many dozen, each year, each season who want to help by watering. So with that, I think we're ready for questions, and I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you, Leslie.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Todd and Carol. I mean, what a microcosm of everything, like just so hit so fast, just recovery efforts that you weren't prepared for. And then to have to go through community engagement processes during COVID, working through the FEMA process that you might have thought you were prepared for, but weren't prepared for, I am guessing, once you got into it. And then actually getting to the replanting, I think it touches on every single thing that our members are dealing with every day. And so really, really thank you for presenting this. As we get going here, please put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. And at the end of this, again, we will ask for or put in the form for CEUs. I think this is probably for you, Carol. Carolyn asked about how Cedar Rapids leveraged a CDBG grant for tree replacement. Could you talk about some of that, how that worked?
Sure. We were fortunate. The Iowa Economic Development Authority is the state agency that manages the CDBG funding for HUD. And again, it wasn't just Cedar Rapids that had experienced the devastation of the Derecho. There were many communities across Iowa that were affected by the derecho and lost their trees. And so Iowa Economic Development Authority actually worked with HUD to make some funds available for disaster recovery, for the removal of stumps, and for the planting of trees. So we were fortunate that we had folks at the state level that helped make that happen.
Yeah. Gary asked, and I think we could probably just drop this in the chat, asked about the species diversity list, if it's publicly available. I think that's all within the ReLeaf plan on your website, correct?
It is. You can find it at the City of Cedar Rapids website. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe you alluded to this a bit that one of the number one goals for folks in Cedar Rapids was native trees. And we hear so often folks wanting to plant native only. And you said that's our goal, but we can't always do that. So have you had any conversations with folks in Cedar Rapids about why we might not want to do native only? Are you getting a lot of push to do native only? What has been that conversation since the idea was originally put forth and then what's being implemented?
Yeah, I'll start, Todd, and then maybe if you wanted to jump in on this. I would say we don't get a lot of pushback or people anxious about planting native only. And I think there is at least one organization that's very keen in the area on planting native only, and especially oak trees. So it's an opportunity to, educate people that we are striving for the diversity and trying to make sure that we're selecting trees for the parkway, especially, that are able to withstand the conditions, that are experienced. Certainly in the parks, we have greater ability to use the palette, the native tree palette, but along the rights of way or the parkways, we want to make sure that we are selecting species that do well in that environment. Todd, what would?
Yeah, we had a really big push for diversity even before Derecho. We had a really wide palette of trees that we used. The one thing I've noticed post Derecho is, and planting natives is great, but we've talked to some other folks here in Iowa that are in the same boat in terms of improving their canopy, and the general consensus is that it would be nice to be able to stick with all quote unquote native trees, right? It's really not feasible if you want to try and have like any sort of like follow a 10, 20, 30 rule or the 5% of any one genus, one of those. It's really, really hard to do that. You can try for it, but it becomes difficult. And the somewhat concerning thing that I've noticed is there tends to be almost this vilification of non-native trees, right? Believe me, it's okay if we plant the occasional ginkgo. The world is not going to end. It's just fine, But that's my concerns of a lot of folks out there who, if it's not native, it is not good. And I don't necessarily think that's a wise choice. I think it's fine to stress natives. I think it's fine to use them appropriately. But I think if you really want a diverse canopy, you're gonna have to implement some perfectly fine trees that may not be native.
Yeah, thanks. A little bit more about placement, and that was really great to see the graphic of showing moving spacing closer together and thinking about how the root systems are going to support those trees longer term. A question about how are you changing your placement of street tree if at how are you changing your placement of street tree if at all? Example, not placing large mature trees in 5-foot tree lawns. So I guess that's fairly specific there, but like what are your, beyond just the space between, what are your parameters for tree placement in the right of way?
Well, I think I'll focus, because most of the work that I've been doing with ReLeaf along streets are in residential areas. So the downtown area, most of those were planted previous to me starting. So maybe I'll defer to Todd on some of those, tree pit kind of placement there. But so our parameters are, as I said, 30 feet apart for shade trees. We tried to stay 40 to 50 feet from intersections. Depending on the width of the right of way or the parkway, we'll select maybe smaller trees if that width is 5 to 8 feet. And then I don't know, we stay 10 feet from driveways. I don't know that I'm answering quite the question that was asked, but Todd, would you?
Yeah, so the question of width comes up a lot. It's come up recently with us too. I will give you what we do. I don't want to say it is the way, it is a way, it's our general attitude, right? If we did not plant any trees in 5-foot wide parkways, we would have very few trees in the city. So it's, and just based on past experience, like I said, 5 foot is just, we plant shade trees there. We realize that there are limitations put on those. I'm not going to advocate for that or say that's the way you should do it, but that is how, that's just kind of my mentality towards it. And in talking to, again, there are other arborists here in Iowa that don't, they're like, nope, minimum 8 feet. So that opinion varies. I personally think that in an urban environment, you plant a tree and you get as much as you can out of it. You know what I mean? We understand they're not going to live as long as something out in the woods or, where they really want to be. We hope they will, but we're going to take advantage of the benefits they provide as long as we can. So yeah, we'll plant shade trees in 5-foot wide parkways. Really, what limits us more is overhead utilities, is placement of like trying to fit in where there are light poles and utility boxes and services to homes and that sort of thing. A lot of the underground utilities we try to work around a bit more, and that actually limits us more, along with site triangles. So we, in our traffic department, and intersections and making sure that there are visibility issues or no visibility issues, that actually affects our placement a bit more than the width of the parkway.
Yeah. Yep. How many days or weeks after impact did you take for the event to be declared as FEMA eligible?
Well, it was fast. I think the governor declared it within a week or so. I think she'd been out and declared it a FEMA. I think it happened that fast. And again, keep in mind, this is not Carol talked about and explained it really, really well. This was not just a Cedar Rapids thing. It was essentially, really bad in all of Iowa, but eastern Iowa was devastated. So even half hour north and south of us from Cedar Rapids to the Mississippi, it was devastating everywhere. A lot of cities were affected. So it wasn't just Cedar Rapids. So the FEMA declaration came pretty quickly.
Yeah. Drew, I see you have a FEMA question too. Could you please clarify what kind of work you're asking about? And we'll come back to that question. I think probably for both of you, we had a question about your community outreach and engagement efforts. Could you share a little bit more about what that looked like? Carol, you alluded to some of it, but could you go into a little bit more detail and maybe what it looked like then, and if you're still keeping up on any of those efforts?
Sure. Well, yeah, I talked already about, what it looked like during the development of the plan. Today, I'm fortunate that I can focus on the replanting efforts, and we work with Trees Forever, and there's another organization in town who's helping with some of the education and outreach, and so right now we're starting to talk a bit about shifting our focus. I mean, planting is still important, and the importance of understanding the benefits of trees is important, but we're trying to really shift our focus a bit too on the importance of pruning and doing that, structural pruning for these young trees that were planted, 5 years ago, some of them now, and so that's I'd say we developed a community benefit or a tree benefit handout for folks, that we give out at public events, and really trying to bring people back to how essential these trees are, because you don't know what you've lost sometimes until it's gone, and then sometimes you forget what it was all about.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Drew, I didn't read the question fully, and I do think this was part of the ReLeaf plan, as I recall. So Drew was asking about the importance of canopy replacement and management, and then wondering about the need to establish mid and understory restoration, shrubs, and herbaceous vegetation. And I recall that there was quite a bit of detail in the ReLeaf plan. So curious to discuss that a little bit more. And then the question specifically was if FEMA funds that kind of work, the mid and understory.
Mm. So, well, I mean, I guess as far as the removal, Todd, maybe you could talk about that, but I could certainly talk about the replacement of the mid and understory. Todd, do you recall if FEMA?
Well, FEMA covered, it didn't matter. So if FEMA just covered debris and damage. So if we had, it didn't matter if it was a 40-foot tall bur oak on the parkway or if it was a 15-foot tall Japanese tree lilac. It didn't matter. If it was damaged to the point where it needed to be pruned or removed, that was a FEMA qualified tree. So the size really didn't matter in terms of what FEMA paid for, at least when we were doing it. Keep in mind, FEMA changes. It had changed just before the Derecho, and it may have changed since. But when we were dealing with it, the size of the tree didn't really matter all that much. It was generally if it was on the public right-of-way or if it would have affected their public right-of-way. So that's why I mentioned private trees there. So if there was a private tree that was damaged that could have possibly blocked a street or taken down power lines, then it would have qualified. But that was about it. In terms of like differentiating mid and upper story, that wasn't part of the process.
And as far as replanting, FEMA funds are not funding the replanting. We have other federal funds through the Forest Service and HUD, as I mentioned, and those are focused primarily on the shade trees, the overstory trees. The relief plan, as Leslie alluded to, the relief plan itself does include quite a bit of information about the importance of the understory, the herbaceous layer, and especially as it relates to the wildlife impact of replanting. Trying to remember the phrase that was used, but soft landings, I think it is. Yeah, yeah. And the importance of planting that shrub layer and the herbaceous, for those Lepidoptera, the moths and butterfly larvae to land on. They start in the tree and then they tend to fall out and they need a place to land. But honestly, we're not doing a lot of that focus right now. It's at least at this stage, we're trying to get the trees planted. We're trying to get education out there about planting the mid-story and understory, but in our parks, we're doing maybe a little bit better chance or job with that, but in the rights of way, we're focused on planting shade trees everywhere they fit, and if there are overhead power lines, we plant understory trees there. So
yeah. Well, maybe a little bit that this question hasn't come up, but Carol, you and I have talked that it is required if the city has identified that location for tree planting, the tree is going in. I think I understand that correctly. It's not the homeowner's choice.
Mhm.
They have a tree in front of their right of way.
Yep.
Correct.
So, cool. I think we probably all would love to see that, but I'm curious what it's like in practice, and what kind of things you run into. You're laughing, so I'm sure it's a joy. What do you been dealing with?
Yes, residents cannot opt out. And we sent letters, and now we've switched to like a FAQ format to folks to let them know that we'll be planting trees in their neighborhood that coming season, and telling them that they cannot opt out. A lot of people say they never receive those, even though we never get those back. Those never bounce back. I don't think that they might be even noticing it in their mail, but I think a lot of people, it's very easy to say they didn't see that, they didn't know that they could opt out, and it's tough. Some days, I'll just be honest, it's really, really tough dealing with people screaming at you because you have the audacity of planting a tree. But I do need to remind myself, and it helps me to come into work some days to realize that they're a very small minority. They're the vocal minority, but the majority of folks are very excited to get a tree. And I've been hugged out there when I've been, like trying to figure out placement of trees. People ask me what I'm doing, and it's like I'm giving them a Christmas present. They're so excited. But yeah, but it's tough
Thanks, Carol.
sometimes. Yeah.
Let's see. We've got about 6 minutes, or sorry, 4 minutes left. Carla has put in the form for the CEUs if you're seeking ISA CEUs, so you can fill that out. And again, we will submit that on your behalf. And maybe in the last few minutes here, Carolyn was going to want to follow up with you. She's got a lot of questions about this, and I believe she lives in Florida, if I've got that right, so dealing with lots of natural disasters. So curious asked about the tree planting contract with with retainer, and is the required right-of-way planting codified? So I think by that she means, is it in your ordinance or policies for the right-of-way planting and facing and everything?
Yes, it is. And so if a new single family house is built, or a larger development, the developers are required, or the individual is required, to plant trees at our spacing levels. So, if they're a corner lot, they might end up planting in the parkway itself. They might, plant 5 to 6 trees because they have 2 frontages there to plant in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was that? No, go ahead, Todd.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that that's in the code too for any sort of commercial development. So any new commercial development has the same thing with all their other requirements. If there's right of way that will support trees, they've got to put right of way trees in as well at the spec that we have.
So it sounds like you probably had to update your code and policies for this. Was that a challenge to get that through, or was it just kind of the city was bought into all of this planning and easy to do?
We didn't have any issues as far as I know. That one of the discussions points that we had that goes back to some of the mandatory questions is I sat right next to the assistant city manager in the early discussions when we were talking about this, and I asked him, like, when our angry resident calls up the city manager's office and complains and says, I don't want a tree, are you going to back us up? Because if you're not going to back us up, then this is pointless. And we got that support, and we've had a supportive council. There's been some questions because there have been some folks that have really pushed back, but there's been no real change in terms of well, no, we're going to revisit this. The city council has remained steady even through changes on the council. The city manager and his team have remained committed. The engineering group in their projects specs. So yeah, there's been support, for it throughout the city. And like Carol said, the folks that don't like it they're vocal, but they're a minority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for this. We'll follow up with Todd and Carol's contact information. I think I speak for them. Happy to help answer questions because so many communities have dealt with this, and it's been such a model for how you can recover from a natural disaster and be really thoughtful with your planning long term. And just what we're talking about here, I mean, if we're serious about trees being infrastructure, which I know we all are on this call, they are same as pipe, sign, everything else. And if a city is signing on to its total care, then trees go in and the city cares for them just like every other piece of infrastructure in our city. So really appreciate Cedar Rapids taking that very seriously. So we're going to wrap for today. I see a few more questions. We can follow up with Carol and Todd after that after this. So thank you for attending this month's learning series, and we hope to see you next month. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.